Brian, I want to talk about Adetokunbo Ogundeji.
Mhm.
He was at the Senior Bowl and was playing defensive end, measured out extremely well when it comes to wingspan and all that.
Longest of any defensive lineman.
Yeah.
Longer than Khalid Kareem, which surprised me because Khalid Kareem had freakishly long arms and a freakishly long wingspan.
And on paper, that's huge. I mean, that's
Mhm.
absolutely huge. So that's one of those things, and we've been talking about some of the other guys. That's one of those things that can, maybe we should take another look at this kid
Mhm.
and do that deeper dive in him. So,
Mhm.
so that's good news. But what were your thoughts on him from a practice film situation?
I thought the only player Robert Hainsey's the only player to me that saw, in my view, his draft stock rise during the week
Okay.
than Ogundeji. I think that it started off with the measurements. Look, the things you can't teach, if you have those, that's great.
Yes,
Because teams are
agreed.
going to take those chances on you. And he showed that 6'4", 260 he was over 260 pounds, 35-inch arms, ridiculous, like unfathomable wingspan, which here's why that's important for a defensive lineman. And we saw this during the week of practice. If I get my hands on you and I get my hands extended and my arms are 3 inches longer than yours, you're done. I win.
Yeah.
Fact. If I have 32-inch arms and you have 35-inch arms and I get my hands on you and extended and you can get more force back at me because your arms are longer, you're going to win.
Right.
Length is important. During the week of practice, Vince, I thought he showed good length. I thought knowing how to use his length. He did a really good job during the run drills of just getting that hand on a tackle and knocking him back and just stoning him there and setting the edge. And now you're not going to make the play on that play. You're going to force the cut inside, and somebody else going to make the play. And that's where I think some Notre Dame fans, I don't think appreciated how good he was, because a lot of the great things he did to make them a great run defense were things that weren't going to factor into plays. He wasn't making the tackle or the tackle for loss or whatever. He was blowing up the tackle or blowing up the pulling guard. He's great. I don't say great. Try not to use that word unless it truly is great. He's really good at seeing the pulling guards and just meeting them in the hole and just blowing them up and forcing early cuts or early bounces. He did that during the week of practice. So his run defense was really good. I think the only time he struggled during the week of practice was when they moved him inside. He played some 3 technique. He's 260 pounds.
Yeah.
And
up in there.
He got blown up on a couple double teams, but a 260 pounder is going to get blown up on double teams.
Sure.
And so, I think he showed as a 3 technique, he can rush the passer in third down situations. But
when he's not like a rush group in there. Yeah.
Right. But he's not a guy you're going to be putting in there 1st and 10 at 3 technique, so that was really the only issue. And he's never faced those kind of double teams before. He's faced tight end tackle double teams.
Right. So he needs to learn how, and again, that's a technique situation, right? I mean, that's something a good D-line coach is going to look at and be like, okay, again, he's only 260 pounds, so there's really only so much you can do. Right. But there is some technique stuff that you can do at that point.
Right. And there's very fair. And I think that the thing that he also did to improve in my opinion, was he was one of the better pass rushers for the national team during the week of practice. He could win with speed off the edge, although that's not his number one move. He doesn't quite have the explosiveness, in my opinion, that Dalen Hayes has. But he won enough. He's athletic enough to where you have to respect that speed off the edge as a tackle, or he's going to beat you around the edge. But then that sets up his counter moves with those long arms. He had a couple really nice counter moves. Now he also needs more work with his hand play, as a lot of guys do.
Sure.
But that length is something you like, and his ability. I mean, he got several pressures. He got a sack in the game. I don't know if it technically counted as a sack because he hit a guy and then the guy ended up falling down, but he was involved in 2 really impressive pressures in the game. And we saw those things during the week of practice, Vince, where, he has those hands where he can get you and then he can get off blocks. His block destruction is impressive. As he learns I think he needs to learn to speed his hands up a little bit. I think he's got good moves, but at times they're not as quick as they need to be. So he's one of those guys that those D-line coaches that like to get their defensive ends and their defensive linemen into like judo and karate and things like that. Like, I think that's something that could really help him because I think if he can speed his hands up a little bit, it's going to make him even more impactful. And I think he has it in him it's just, again, he's another guy that Mike Elston got, and he was a big ball of clay. He was, I think, 17 years old as a freshman.
Yeah, he's a young kid. Yeah,
they flipped him from Western Michigan. He was like 220 pounds when he showed up. So, Mike Elston had to bring him a long way, and I thought he did a great job doing so. But because he started with such a raw player, there's still a lot of room for him to even add to that arsenal. And so I think he's someone that, again, I don't think you're going to take him in round one. Although Mike Tannenbaum, who works for ESPN and the NFL Network, one or the other, I forget, I think he's an NFL Network guy. He's a former GM in the Jets. He actually was talking about him during the Thursday practice, and I was listening to it kind of on the side as I was doing other things, and he talked about how he thinks he's a guy that teams are going to start having discussions about late in the first round.
Wow.
I don't know if I see that, but when you're having that conversation, I think that speaks volumes to how this was before the game, to how impactful he was and how impressive he was during the week of practice. Because the one thing that he has that maybe like a Robert Hainsey doesn't is he has those measurables that you can't teach. Robert Hainsey doesn't have those. Robert Hainsey has a game that you love. Adetokunbo has measurables that you can't teach and a game that you really like and that is developing. So I thought during the week of practice, he was one of the more consistently effective edge players that the national team had, and I thought he really helped his stock just on the practices alone.
Well, let's move into the game then, because I want to hear your thoughts on how he performed in the game, because it sounds like because of the week of practice, the game situation can only just kind of project him even further.
Yeah, I mean, he was a little quiet early, good setting the edge. Pass rushes didn't do a whole lot early, but as the game got deeper, he started having more impactful pass rushes. He had a nice power move where he just kind of got his hands underneath the lineman and just kind of rode him back and then came off and pressured the quarterback. Didn't get the sack, but forced the quarterback to step into the pocket. And then I think it was second half, he had a sack, which I thought he didn't disappoint in the game. How about that? Like, he showed in the game what he'd showed during the week of practice, which is I need work. I'm not going to dominate every snap. But if he was dominating every snap, he'd be a top 10 pick, and he wouldn't have been at the Senior Bowl anyway.
Right.
So I thought he impressed me. I don't think him and Hainsey are two guys to me that did the most to improve their draft stock, because to me, they went from probably day 3 guys to now I think teams are going to start talking about them on day 2. Now, will they be picked day 2? That's a different conversation. But because that depends on needs, and a team may say, hey, we love him, but this other player that we graded as a late first round pick fell, and that's just kind of how it works. I mean, that's how the draft works. And so sometimes guys that most teams viewed as 3rd or 4th round picks get picked in the 2nd round. And sometimes a team like the Houston Texans, they're now fired former head coach, will take some offensive tackle that no one ever heard of, who's a 3rd round player in the 1st round because they needed a tackle. So it's just, the draft is a weird beast, but I think he did a lot to improve his draft stock. And I think the more teams learn about him and his character and his background, he's like a 21-year-old 5th-year senior.
Yeah, good point.
They're going to look at him and say, boy, this is a guy with a lot. And you can watch him in practice. He has fun playing football. I mean, it's hard to tell because he's got this emotionless, expressionless facial. Even when he's like after the Clemson game, when there's a picture of him screaming, he still looked like he was yelling, but he just looked like he wasn't emotional because he's just got that face. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
But he's an energetic, fun, like get after it, competitive kid. And honestly, the only rep that I saw Robert Hainsey just flat out get whipped all week was Ogundeji.
Yeah.
He was a guard, and Ogundeji was a 3 technique, and just blew past him off the ball. And it was like, okay, that doesn't happen to Robert Hainsey very often. And so I thought he had a really, really good week of practice. I think he certainly helped himself a ton. And I think that there's a good chance that in 2 consecutive drafts, Notre Dame is going to have 4 defensive ends get picked. That's not going to hurt their defensive end recruiting moving forward.
Awesome. Yeah,
as you remember, Julian Aguilar and Khalid Kareem got picked in rounds 3 and 5 last year. I could see that being similar to this year. I could see 3rd to 5th for these 2 guys, especially after what they did as long as the medicals check out for both. I could see that's my only concern with Dalen Hayes, because he had so many injuries in high school.
Right.
He's only had the 1 major injury at Notre Dame, but it was the same injury. It was a shoulder. So as long as the medicals check out, I could see both of them being mid-round picks, and I could see Ogundeji maybe even being a guy that some team falls in love with in round 3. I think at this point in time, yeah.
No, again, another kid to root for. And I know that sounds cliche, and I've said it a lot, but this is just a good group of kids.
I wouldn't say that about every kid that came through Notre Dame.
And I agree with you.
Even recently, there's been a defensive lineman recently. I'm like, whatever.
Right. And you and I have had those conversations. But these, and I keep saying kids because that just means I'm old. But these young men are easy to root for, and it gets me excited to watch the draft to see where these guys are going to fall. And Adetokunbo Ogundeji is another one of those guys. So I'm excited to see, what his future holds. I think that's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, no doubt.